Aristotle's golden mean. So in the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle explains the mean between the extremes, what we call his golden mean. And it's really interesting that Buddha and other thinkers discovered a similar concept and talked about it. Buddha called it the middle way. It's also interesting that this concept, the golden mean, really captures the Greeks' love for moderation and harmony and balance and everything. Okay? So let's get into this. First of all, a habit is something that we repeatedly do and that becomes a disposition, a character trait. Now, a virtue is simply a habit that leads to flourishing. It's usually one that people are drawn to. A virtue is a habit, a disposition, a character trait, something you usually do that leads to flourishing. A vice is a habit that diminishes flourishing. So for example, if I smoked cigarettes every day, that would be a vice to my health. So Aristotle observes that the flourishing person, the good person, the wise person, usually exhibits behavior that's a mean between two extremes, excess and deficiency. So look at the chart to better understand this, and I'll talk a bit about the chart. Okay. Number one, courage is good. Courage is the virtue. So if I'm cowardly or too shy, I will never ask the girl out on a date, or I may never have the courage to apply for the job or the raise. Right? On the other hand, I probably won't flourish if I'm at the other extreme. If I ask everyone out on a date, show no modesty, and demand a raise, right? So there's a mean between those two extremes that captures virtuous behavior or describes it. Look at the second row. Shame. You should have some shame for Aristotle. Modesty is a virtue, but too much and you are what he calls shy, and this again can cause you to miss opportunities. Now, Aristotle is not saying that shyness is evil. Rather, he's just saying that too much shame or too much shyness or whatever can cause me to miss opportunities and thereby not reach my full potential, not flourish in life. Again, I might be too shy to go to the party, meet new people, apply for the job. But you don't want to go in the other extreme either and be a shameless narcissistic jerk. It's really hard to flourish and make deep friendships and so on when you're a narcissistic jerk. Right? So again, there's nothing evil about being shy or shameless. It's just that it won't lead to the highest levels of flourishing that you're capable of. Right? It won't lead to the higher levels of self-actualization. Okay, let's look at the next row, or a row down there, conversation. So let's say you and I are at a party and I start talking about my stapler for 5 minutes. And I go on and on. Excuse me. And I say, it's black, it's shiny. Look, I can open it up and there's staples in there. I love my stapler. It puts things together. Okay, if I talk like 5 minutes like that, I have a deficiency. Okay? And my deficiency in conversation abilities, Plato calls boorish. Okay? I'm deficient there. On the other hand, you can be a buffoon. The loud person is obnoxious in a really different way. Okay? And you know who you are, right? So the mean, the virtue, is wittiness. All right, look at the social conduct row. Now, again, I might be the type of person that agrees with everything you say. I'm a yes person. So if you ask me my political views, I just agree with whatever you say. Okay? We can call this obsequious behavior. The problem here is not that obsequious behavior is evil. It's just that it doesn't usually lead to flourishing because I can't form deep relationships. And I can't form them because I'm not my own person, or I'm not revealing who I really am. So the virtue, the middle, the mean, is being friendly. So I can state my opinions about politics and agree with you on some issues and disagree on others. But I do it in a friendly way. I am my own person. When I'm virtuous in the mean, I understand the boundaries of good relationships. I understand that I must be my own person before I can be in a meaningful relationship. Now, at the other extreme, we have cantankerous behavior, which is like the cranky old curmudgeon who disagrees with everything you say and might have a superiority complex or might yell at you for being on his lawn or something. Let's jump down to the row that says when others wrong you. So let's say you go to your dorm room and your roommate is on your side of the room eating your food and using your pillowcase as a Kleenex. This is an injustice. You are being wronged. Okay? Now, some of us want to avoid conflict at all costs, and this is not good. We're pushovers, right? We're doormats. We have that deficiency. Now, it's not evil to be a pushover, but it just won't lead to the best life possible for you. So you must create habits, and preferably you learn them in childhood, but you must create habits in which you stand up for yourself, in which you have healthy boundaries. So for Aristotle, the virtue here is to first get angry. Anger is a virtue. But you shouldn't be too angry or too little angry. It's a virtue as long as anger is at the right person for the right reason at the right time to the right degree. Don't let your roommate get away with this injustice. You should be angry and take reasonable action. When your roommate makes amends, you should then forgive, understand, and move on. According to Aristotle, this is what the good and flourishing, the virtuous person does. Okay. Now, on the other hand, you could lose your mind and just shoot them or something. That would be a deficiency, a vice as well. We also know people who might be revengeful and resentful for the rest of their life. I think we all know little old ladies who get in an argument, maybe about an upside-down cake or something, and they don't talk to each other for 20 years. This sort of attitude is toxic to your well-being. It's being filled with this revenge and resentment for 20 years prevents flourishing in some ways. It's like a cold, dark force in your psyche that makes all of your perceptions a bit gloomy and tinged with resentment. So for Aristotle, the virtue is to let go after one has become angry and forgave and understanding. Now look at the row below it. This is when you wrong others. Again, I could be indifferent or remorseless when I wrong others, but that won't lead to very deep relationships, and it's just not the type of person I want to be, and probably you want to be. Rather, we want to be the type of people who don't do wrong, or at least who acknowledges the wrong that they do and try to make amends for it. Now, on the other hand, I could do wrong and beat myself up for years about it. I could hold on to toxic guilt and shame for years, and this would be a barrier to flourishing too. You can see this as the deficiency vice. So the virtuous path is to first acknowledge my wrong. After all, we all make mistakes, experience regret, try to make amends, and then, regardless of whether the wrong person accepts the amends, I need to forgive myself to let go so I can move on and flourish in life. We all make mistakes, and we need to forgive ourselves after learning from them. So notice you could go on and on like this, and Aristotle does. He's describing the virtues and trying to aspire or inspire us to be virtuous. And he's describing the wise person, the virtuous person. So you can love yourself too much or too little. You can eat too much or too little, and so on. But let's go to these questions now so we can more deeply understand what this golden mean is about. The first one says, can the golden mean guide me in the same way utilitarianism or egoism can? And I think the answer is no. The golden mean is not very action guiding. So, for example, what is too much or too little for me to eat? Right? If I'm sitting at the table with Aristotle, he would say, don't eat too much or too little. So, but that doesn't tell me how much to eat. So Aristotle is not so much giving us a law that we can follow. Right? Rather, he's describing how virtuous people actually behave. The virtuous person gravitates towards the right amount of food, towards the mean in most things. He's not so much giving ethical advice in a way, he's describing what ethical characters do. And the virtuous person has this habit or disposition that allows them to see the mean and act accordingly. Okay, number 2. Why is it harder to be virtuous than viceful? Well, it's harder to be virtuous because when you look at the chart, there's one way to be virtuous and 2 ways to be viceful. Right? You could think of the virtue as the bullseye, and then you go infinitely in the directions to the left or the right, and to the viceful directions. Let's look at the next one. How do we learn the virtues? Okay, Aristotle says that most moral habits are learned through practice, habituation, not primarily thinking. So it's best to learn them as children, and to set up political systems that habituate us to good habits, habits that lead to flourishing. So just think of some of the ways you can help your children. First, don't give them cigarettes or let them smoke. Okay. Second, you could create study habits. So a parent might set aside 4 to 5 o'clock every day for a time in which the child does homework or reads a book. And every day it's the same. Okay. Or physical health. Parents can habituate children to eat healthy and to go to bed at a reasonable time. Manners. Parents can model and train children to say thank you, right? And teach other polite gestures that lubricate the gears of social discourse and friendliness, and so on. So we learn these habits, these moral habits or virtues through practice, and preferably in childhood. And this is one reason why Aristotle believed ethics was a branch of politics. We should set up political structures that ensure certain habits will be cultivated. Notice too that it's really hard to change your habits as an adult. So imagine one person never had a cigarette. Okay, it's very easy for him not to smoke. But imagine my parents gave me cigarettes ever since I was an 8-year-old child. As an adult, I'm at a disadvantage. I have to work really hard to change my habit, whereas it comes naturally for you to resist cigarettes, to do the right thing, the healthy thing. So our parents and our political structures play important roles in creating these virtues in young people. And if you neglect to do this, you're only hurting the child. So Aristotle also talks about weakness of will, akrasia. He talks about the incontinent person who wants to do wrong and does it. He talks about the continent person who wants to do wrong but doesn't do it. And the virtuous person who neither wants to do wrong nor does it. Okay, so we want to cultivate our character so that we naturally and habitually do the good. So we're disposed to do the good act. Okay, here's the next question. What about murder? Okay. Notice the golden mean is not an absolute rule. For example, Aristotle would not take murder and say the excess would be murdering 10 people, the deficiency would be murdering 1 person a year, but Bob, he killed 5. He's virtuous. Okay. No, this silliness doesn't follow from his ethics. And Aristotle says ethics is an approximate science, not exact, and that some things are wrong no matter how much or how little you have of them. Right? So in short, you should not aim for the mean of murder because murder is intrinsically bad. Right? He's not laying down rules so much as he is describing virtuous behavior. The next question is Aristotle an egoist or a relativist or a utilitarian? And the answer is no, he's a virtue theorist. Aristotle would disagree with ethical egoism because it violates the golden mean. Right? It doesn't lead to human flourishing because you can be too concerned with your self-interest, with your own self-interest, and maybe lack true friends, okay? Or excessively concerned with the interest of others and not take good care of yourself. The mean, the virtue, is to balance concern for yourself and others. Aristotle also is not a relativist because he believes there are, first of all, objective components to human flourishing. A relativist doesn't. But more importantly, he believes there is a best or correct way to act in each situation. A relativist doesn't. Aristotle is a situationalist, not a relativist. He's a virtue theorist, not a relativist. So here's an example of situationalism. The ballerina and the sumo wrestler may need different amounts of food, but there's an optimal amount of food for each. There is a correct amount of food for each person, though it varies from person to person. Since there is an objectively correct amount in each situation, he's not a relativist. Okay, you may want to think on that for a while. So that's his golden mean. It's a small part of his virtue theory, but an important part. And I'll explain virtue theory in a later video. But take a look at the chart again. On each row, evaluate whether you are more towards the excess or the deficiency, or if you're right on target, hitting the mean, right? I imagine very few people hit the mean on everything. I certainly don't. So use this chart of the golden mean. If you use it in this way, it can help make us more aware of our strengths and weaknesses. It guides us in thinking about where our habits come from, whether we should try to change them, the type of thinking that supports them, and how to change them. That is, I don't think this golden mean is just a description of how virtuous people behave, but it's also a tool for self-reflection and self-improvement. Thanks.